ask me where your secondary dangler was?
I found it. It's right here.
I'm
Secondarily dangling.
I'm going to pause this Zoom meeting so I can't see you because I don't want to know. That is a sufficient intro. No need for me to ruin this episode by singing.
Yeah, we did plenty of that, and you posted it to the Instagram, and then people all, I think, fled.
Threw up in their mouth. Yeah.
While fleeing, which makes it hard to run. You can't, never mind. It's getting graphic.
Anyway, welcome to the next episode, the latest episode. Welcome to this episode of the Carmudgeon Show. My name is Jason Discount Sandler Camisa. That's Derek Tam-Scott. I haven't done that in a while. To exercise that muscle, the intro muscle. And today we're going to talk about what we did this weekend. Or
wow. Oh, yes. You're talking about the car
things.
stuff.
Yeah, well, you want to talk about secondary danglers. I need to talk about car stuff.
Yes, right.
I
Automobiles.
feel slightly responsible for the debacle that was this past weekend, because many times on this show, and in person, and in writing, and in print, I have said that the Alfa Romeo Giulia Quadrifoglio is amazing and potentially the best sports sedan on sale. Oh, my phone fell. Hold on, everyone. My recording device has plummeted.
Your sophisticated technical solution for phone positioning. Are you using duct tape or gaffing tape or painter's tape?
I'm using the good gaff tape stuff. Like, this is not supposed to happen. All right.
I'm using Scotch tape.
Are you really? See, if you'd only use the really good expensive stuff that I used, your phone could fall too. Anyway, let's see if that holds. Technical difficulties that we're not going to edit out because we want everyone to know just how high budget this show is. Like I was saying, there have been times in the history of the world that I have pronounced the Alfa Romeo Giulia Quadrifoglio the best sports sedan in the world. Just checking to see if the phone doesn't fall again. And you listened to me, and you rented one, and then you drove one, and then you gave one to your dad to drive because you're the actual enabler here.
All of this is 100% factual. So my dad doesn't read magazines and doesn't consume media anymore about cars, but he's like a car guy. He just is so he's been doing it so long he doesn't care anymore. And so
is that a thing? That happens?
It happened. I mean, he's 80. It could happen. I don't know. So he drives an E39 M5, which is heavily modified, has a bunch of Dynon stuff, and has 470 horsepower, and is frankly kind of terrifying. I know this because I drove it yesterday. And I was like, he for a long time was like, I will never have a sedan, I'll never have a this, I'll never have a that, I will only drive, cool shit. And then he bought a sedan at some point. But he's like, oh, it doesn't handle well. Let me spend all this money to make it handle better and do all these things better. And he was like, whatever. He spent all this money and it was faster, and that was kind of it. And so once I experienced the Giulia at your recommendation, because I wanted to see how good it was. Well, I'm an Alfa Romeo guy anyway. And so then I was like, holy crap, this thing's kind of magnificent, especially compared to the M5, which, great though it is not a sports car. You can't drive it like a sports car. You drive it like a sports sedan. And so then I was like, holy crap, this is amazing. You have to experience this, Dad, because I think this is the experience you've been looking for 2 decades since he bought an Audi C5 A6 4.2.
Well, no wonder he said he was never going to buy a sedan. If that was the sports sedan that he was that's amazing, he had, and then he understeered into a tree.
Well, he had Volvo Amazons, and he had 3 Jaguar XJs before that. All of those he bought new in this, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And so then he got the M5 after the Audi because he was like, let's get something that's a little more sporting at least, or tries to be. And he's had that for, 15 years or whatever, however long it's been. And then I was like, okay, you have to try the Alpha out. And then he was like, okay, find me one. And it has to be red, and it has to have the carbon fiber seats. And
I love that an 80-year-old is like, it has to have the carbon fiber, non-adjustable, tight, holdy bucket seats. That's so awesome.
Yeah, that sums my dad up in a nutshell. This is why I'm such an enthusiast, shall we say.
I was going to say, if you tried to make the argument that that's why you're such an old man, it would have to be that he is a man-child still, and therefore somebody had to be the old man in the relationship, and it was going to be you.
No. I just meant that's why I'm so enthusiastic. I mean, if that's the cloth from which I'm cut. My mom also is also a hardcore. Well, she drives a Fiat Abarth 500 as her daily, so she's enthusiastic also. In any case, so we found one, and I found one, and I contacted the seller, and I mentioned that some journalist had made me try one out, and I thought it was magnificent, and that's why my dad was buying one. And then he's like, "Oh, what's the journalist's name?" And I was like, "He's some guy named Jason Camisa." And he's like, "Oh, I know Jason because I guess he was in industry also." So anyway, small world.
Old friend of mine.
Yeah, it's an old friend of Jason's. So now the car belongs to my dad. I delivered it to him last night. You and I went down to recover it in Southern California. I texted my dad to ask him if he'd driven it. He said no, he was on page 25 of the quick reference guide.
I love it. First of all, I should say you left out one very important part. We both entered a Corolla rental car and motored down to Los Angeles, 420-something miles, in a Corolla rental so that we could then procure the Alfa Giulia Quadrifoglio in red with carbon seats from my old friend.
I was hoping to leave that detail out. I've forgotten already that happened.
Well, the best part was when you took that wrong turn in Albuquerque and then wound up in Tequila, Mexico, and did 100 miles an hour in the thing. Yeah,
that's right.
Wound up in an
and it was
post.
Not the kind of car you accidentally do 100 miles an hour in. Which
no,
incidentally,
it's a few miles. I mean, some would it,
kilometers. Many kilometers. Mexican kilometros, or however you say it in Espanol.
I feel like pesos. It's sort of lots of them mean a very little small amount.
Yes, the exchange rate is not that favorable right now. But yeah, it's not the kind of thing you do 100 miles an hour. I mean, also, it might have been you that was doing 100, not me, perhaps.
No.
God damn it.
I'm not blaming you on this. Listen, I tried to kill it. So what you probably, I don't think you actually know this. We were sitting at a red light at one point when you were in the Alfa right after you'd taken it, and I was in the Corolla. And we're sitting at a red light, and I pulled the e-brake, which is the electronic e-brake, and tried to get it to do a standing burnout. But all it would do is and then drag the rear wheels towards the Alfa, which is, as of yet uninsured and not yet titled in your dad's name. And I thought, let me not punt the Alfa with the Cornholer rental car. But I did do several
That's responsible
butt
motoring.
drags. Yeah. So, sorry, I should have told you that earlier.
Took quite some time to achieve velocity in the Corolla, which is very dissimilar to the Alfa.
That's true. I will say that I actually don't think that Corolla is a bad car. It's just not overpowered in the way that the cars that we tend to like are. But that's a different story. Okay, so now that your dad has a Giulia,
which he has not driven,
which he has not yet driven, but is studying, which is most important.
Yes.
How many cars? This makes me so smile. Ow, this hurts. How many cars are there in the Tamscott family that exist because I said something about them? Because I believe your brother bought a GT350 on my recommendation.
Oh, did he?
GT350R, yes.
He did buy
blamed
GT350R.
me anyway.
Oh, well, that seems convenient.
Oh, he blamed me, and then he blamed me for his GTI. And did he have something else in between that he blamed me for? I mean, I barely know the guy, and he was blaming me for everything, which made me like him.
The GT3.
Obviously. Oh. How often do I forget? Oh, the GT3. Yeah.
Yeah, and
and your e-Golf.
And the e-Golf.
E-Golf.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
I like this track record. You cost me a Ferrari 308 GT4.
I did, yes. And my mother has not yet bought anything because of you.
Yet. I love how you say yet, because what the audience doesn't know is that your E-Golf goes to Mama E. Tam-Scott. We got to come up with some fun name for her. Like, what's the parent of a hyphen? A parenthetical? Or I don't know. Anyway, your mother is going to place...
M-hyphen. M-dash, the long one. Nobody knows what an M-dash is. I'm sorry.
M-dash, E-M-D-A-S-H, right?
Look it up. Or maybe we'll find an insert.
I
Not for you. I meant for the
magazines.
audience. For the audience. I know you know what an M-dash is.
M-dash is the long one that connects two words or two thoughts, like almost like a... Anyway.
With a pause, yes.
Yes, so I think M-dash is putting down the keys to her Fiat 500 to drive your
M for mom, right? Mama dash.
It's M-M-M. So the M-dash replaces the O, and therefore it's mum. Anyway, she's driving your e-Golf tonight? to work?
Yeah, I think she is. So she's an ER physician, so she's, I think, driving it to work tonight. I think actually she might be sitting in it using the air conditioning right now because it's uncommonly hot in the San Francisco area right now. And she does not have air conditioning because no houses in the San Francisco area or in the Bay Area have air conditioning. At least
So
not
the
this far
bigger
west.
point here is that it could be that I have a Mark 7 Golf, my mom drives a Mark 7 Golf, you have a Mark 7 Golf, your brother has a Mark 7 Golf, and your mom might like your E-Golf so much that she would have a Mark 7 Golf. And then your dad and your brother both have cars because of me, and this just makes me feel very special because I'm costing you guys a lot of money.
Yes, but we're having some motoring as experience. And I'm sure that the audience has had plenty of these experiences too. I mean, how often is it that people, like strangers, come up to you? Didn't this happen to us at Cars and Coffee 2 weeks ago where some dude was like, I used to have all these, like, you know, big compensatory sports cars, and I have a Miata now, and it's the best car I've ever owned, right? That guy there was a guy with a white ND who came up to you and said that, right?
Yeah, because of the review. Because I said stop trying to buy a penis enlargement, just get a Miata. And he apparently that resonated with him. For whatever reason, he wound up buying one. And got rid of, he had a Mustang, Camaro, something like that.
Yeah, it might have been a Corvette or like a Zeus. I forget. It was one of those things where I was like, "Ooh, that's like one of those, you know, brute force type of cars."
Yes, it was something with a lot of push rods and a tremendous amount of displacement. Now he has a Miata.
And he loves it.
Good, as it should be. So we got back last night from this very long trip. That is a long, miserable drive, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not a good one. It's not. Well, at least we came 101 back, but going down 5 is most unpleasant.
I feel like, I mean, everyone, like I was just talking to my sister earlier today, and we were talking about the LA to San Francisco drive, and like, you know, she sort of mentioned like, oh, that's just still on the West Coast. And I'm like, do you understand that my weekend started with me waking up, having breakfast, leaving, going to your house, and going to LA and doing our thing, and then getting home at 10 o'clock at night on Sunday. I mean, like that trip consumed our entire weekend. And as per the visual evidence, you were not driving slowly.
Yeah.
While we were in Mexico.
Yes, correct. Yes.
I mean, it's just such a long drive.
And featureless.
We did stop and get one good picture of the car.
Yeah, so 101 is not so bad. But yes, the photos from that, oh, you know what? I should get them off the camera. In any case, yes. Now there's Alfa Romeo. It has some thrust and very short gearing, which makes it an absolute joy.
It's also completely different. That was this other thing that I loved is we parked it next to another Giulia Quadrifoglio in Rosso Competizione. Right.
Tricoat.
So the same exact color. Because the Giulia Quadrifoglio is available in 2 reds. One is Rosso Alfa Romeo, which has been around since the year of the flood, and then Rosso Competizione, which is the tricoat, gorgeous, almost Mazda Soul-ready kind of beautiful red. And this other guy at Cars and Coffee, we went to Cars and Coffee Malibu, and while you're in LA, do that. And some other guy parks an identical Giulia QV next to this one, and the 2 cars were completely different colors.
Even though they're the same color.
Mm-hmm. All I kept thinking was only Italy. Like, how the fuck are you going to match either one of these cars? If you ever have to get a bottle of touch-up paint, it's like, what day was it made? Like, we'll try to go back through the records and figure out which. Oh,
there's not going to be any records from that. Please.
I know, it's true. You're right. But anyway, magnificent car. I mean, 8-9 hours, however long we were in it in total. Completely comfortable. It's just you said it at one point. You're like, this is just so good at being a car.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's really good at being a car, but then if you want to just haul absolute ass like a maniac, it's very happy to do that as well. I probably can't tell this story because there's some chance my dad might watch this someday. There's a great section of road up to his house, and I did not permanently damage the car, but I was transporting dinner. And it ended up literally distributed about the interior of the car, which I rectified, and it's fine.
Febreze and a
There was like a 4-stage process. I think I completely rectified it. I thought I was going to have to take the passenger seat out to fix it, but I was able to. Don't worry, it was bolognese.
Rotten bullet. It's appropriate. I mean, if you're going to spill dinner all over the interior of Alfa Romeo.
But it's a very great road up to his house. It's a great test section of roads. That's why I knew actually that the answer was no. He had not driven it yet because he did not text me speaking in tongues to say how great it was. Because that section of road is his test. Like there's this one corner he would always get into 4-wheel drift, going around on the hill on the way up to his house. And so I knew he hadn't driven the car yet because he hasn't texted me yet raving about the car, which I know he will do.
You know, it's interesting because we spent so much time on it yesterday, yes, I guess it was yesterday. And when I first drove that car, I liked it a lot. I really liked it. And we were doing the ignition video that I did on the car. And at that point, I was still sort of reeling from the discovery that...
Oh, it was not going to be a manual.
It was right. So
this is like in late 2016.
Yeah. Yeah.
November.
No, early. Was it late 16 or 15?
November of 16.
Right. How do you remember? You weren't even there. And you still remember this. Anyway, were you born
I saw the
yet?
car at your house.
Oh, the one that when it wouldn't make it up my driveway.
Yeah, I think you had 2 of them.
Yeah, I had 2 of them. I've tested.
You had a red one and a blue
one.
one.
And a blue one because I did an ignition and a head-to-head sort of semi-simultaneously. But you know, I wrote the intro to that episode, and then we often adjust things on the fly, right? I mean, I hadn't spent too much time in the car before I wrote the intro, and in this case, really, had I written the intro long after driving or after spending a lot of time with the car, it probably would have been different. The manual transmission thing was a huge letdown, but the real story of that car is it's good and it's fun and it's nice and it's really good at being a car, but you have no idea what it can do until you do it. It's the type of car that has 2 completely different personalities. So it's not boring to drive normally. I mean, it's got really quick steering and the engine sounds good and whatever. But I remember in the middle of filming, we hadn't done any of the in-cars, and the in-car is sort of filming. This was the day that Donald Trump was elected, actually. So you're right, it was November. I remember liking it and then getting into it to transport from one stage to the other on this bumpy, twisty road, and just couldn't believe the speed this car would carry, and also the fun with which it carried that speed.
Yes, joyfully.
So, yeah.
Speed joyfully. And joyfully is not a thing that is guaranteed, and in fact it's much too rare in modern cars, and that's what I think differentiates it so well. Yeah.
Curious to see what is your dad, Papa parentheses, says, you know, after an E39 look. I mean, you sort of have this impression now that the E39 sucks, and I kind of disagree with you. I still think of the E39 as the high water mark of sports sedans, and by that I mean cars that you drive every day that are capable and do everything, but are just interactive enough and just entertaining enough to be a perfect, no compromises conveyance. Coming from an E39 M5 is a high water mark. So, you know, if your immediate impression after getting out of the Giulia was, then...
The body control. I mean, it's just, it feels big, it feels hefty in a way that, I mean, this is the magic of the last 20 years of chassis tuning. And this is the thing that consistently blows everybody's mind about, is far back maybe as the 458, right? When you hit the button for the bumpy road button and everything sort of like the car becomes civilized. I mean, this is this trade-off that 20 years ago or 25 years ago, if a car was going to handle, it was going to ride like shit. And now we exist in this world where that is no longer the case. And so the Giulia really highlights that. And I think being in the M5 to some extent also did for me, because the thing just feels really just heavy and inert after the Giulia.
But it also
and that's as it should be. It's 20 years older. What's that?
And it's modified too, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
So, I mean, from the factory, those cars they weren't clumsy in the ride department. What I liked about them is that they actually rode well. What I didn't love about them is, you know, you put an E39 M5 on a track and it's not happy.
That's what I mean. The body control of the car is just, it feels heavy, and it is.
Yeah.
It is what it feels like what it is.
I think they're pretty close in weight.
No, but the Alfa doesn't feel heavy.
Yeah,
the Alfa doesn't feel its weight. The Alfa feels 1,000 pounds lighter than it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, funny what, you know, 1.9 turn lock-to-lock steering will do with, it's really light, and the Alfa steering's really light and really quick. And that combined with really, really good body control will fool you into thinking anything's lightweight. So yeah, interesting. So since we're talking about all the cars that we own, let's breathe those like influencer, like my Bugatti this and my, whatever.
Yeah, except for in your case, and my case, my electric Volkswagen with 134 horsepower this.
We're like the opposite of those douchebag influencers. We're like, look how fucking poor we are. We have e-golf. But
it's not the fast one.
It's not the fast one. But I did, after spending so much time on the Giulia, enjoy one thing about the e-golf when I got back in it at your place last night and drove home, which is the imaging of the stereo. That's I'm going to say that is the biggest shortcoming of the Giulia. The sound quality is good, but I got in the e-golf and I'm like, oh, imaging, the sound is up here. There's a beautiful sound stage. So, score one for the one and one only for the e-golf.
I'm just delighted that an Italian car has a functional radio.
Yeah, it's true. But I did, I don't know if we've talked about this on the show. I did a couple more modifications to the e-golf and some other cars recently that I do want to talk about. So the e-golf, I think earlier on the show we talked about that I put 18-inch wheels and Pilot Sport 4S's on it.
Yes.
Pulled 1.065G around a skid pad. Regularly pulls 1.09 to 1.14 on on-ramps. Not that I've measured that at all. Closed course, idiot drive, whatever.
Closed driver.
But then in one of my... I didn't hear what you said. It's probably for the better. Idiot driver. But anyway, in one of my Instagram posts, a company called 034 Motorsport responded. And they're like, your e-golf would probably turn a lot better if you put a big rear sway bar on it. And so I did. 034 Motorsport was not only stupid enough to enable me in that comment, but then also to give me one of those sway bars to test out. And I haven't done any skid pad testing on it or anything yet. But oh my God. So scientifically and engineeringly, when you put a larger sway bar on a car without changing anything else, basically what you're doing is decreasing understeer, or in the hope
of increasing oversteer.
The bar that they gave me is for the GTI, and the GTI has far less weight over the rear. This is because of how heavy the battery is in the e-Golf. The e-Golf actually has the best weight distribution of any Mark 7 Golf, including the e-Golf R.
I believe that.
So with all the weight in the back, it made a huge difference. I mean, it went from like a 7 or on the understeer scale, like on Randy Pope's, like minus 10 to plus 10. I went from like a 7 to probably a 2, which means like on a quick on ramp, if I turn in quickly, it will step out sideways. But then it always kind of comes right back in. I don't have to manage the rear end. And I've been talking to the guys a lot, and we're thinking about doing an RS3 rear bar because that's the stiffest of all the ones that they do.
And the RS3 is more rearward weight distribution than a GTI.
Yeah,
and it fits up. It fits.
Yeah, they're all the Audi A3 is a Golf. There are fitment issues because of the rear
exhaust.
Axle
No,
and the exhaust.
It's not from
both
the exhaust.
Of which our cars don't have. Well, no. I mean, yeah, yes, there are exhaust and axles on the RS3 that the e-Golf doesn't have. So, but if it fits the RS3, it should fit. So we may do something like that. I did one video of like a slow-mo video of the e-Golf coming around a corner completely ass first with the front tires still spinning, trying to pull itself straight. But I'm not going to tell you what it took to get that done. The car does not want to spin.
Okay.
But yeah, so I'm going to continue to ruin my e-Golf. Also, and this is a testament to
let's see with the goal of if you can possibly get the range back to the small battery pack. Right, because the original range was 83 miles, and then the new ones are 126. So if you make enough modifications, maybe you can get the new car to have the range of the old car.
I'm already pretty close. I'm averaging 90s. I mean, so all it's going to do is take like me to turn the heat on or something. But actually, I was talking to the 034 guys, and I'm like, if I put 3 degrees of negative camber in it, that's actually going to reduce the contact patch size, and I might and that
reduce rolling resistance.
Yeah, maybe I'll get a couple miles back. And their response, because they're fucking idiots in all the right ways, are like, well, why don't you lower the car? So lowering the car, it decreases the frontal area, which would give me an aero benefit. And I'm like, yeah, haha, stupid. But so what they did was, one of the techs who works there has an e-Golf, or his wife has an e-Golf. And so they brought it in and they put Golf R lowering springs on it. And it's sat completely wrong. Like the front end of the air and the back dragging. Yeah. So that didn't work. So now they're going to try. Apparently, the post that I made about the sway bar for the e-Golf generated enough interest that they think there's a market for e-Golf lowering springs.
What?
Yeah.
Really?
Well, think about all the people you know that have e-Golf. These are people.
Well, they all know you, so they're all kind of bent.
Don't start that shit with me. Didn't you just tell me that somebody stopped by ISSIMI the other day?
Oh, okay, yeah. Somebody did stop by ISSIMI. He actually bought a Tesla Roadster, and he bought a Tesla Roadster to replace his e-Golf. I say his electric commuter. Oh. Well, he has an Esprit, and he has two 355s, F355 manuals, and his daily was an e-Golf, and he was like, I like electric cars, but I want something, more impactful, so he wanted a Tesla Roadster. And I was like, oh, can I buy your e-Golf? Because this was before I bought mine. He's like, I'm giving it to my daughter. And I was like, oh, rats. But yes, he did show up in an e-Golf.
I mean, the amount of people who showed up at ISSIMI, through the year that I was there a lot, in some sort of electric dinghy is staggering. I mean, first of all, the outside's all e-Golfs, and there's a Bolt among the coworkers, and I don't know, we want to talk about that.
500e.
But 500e, I mean, there's just...
The Fiat. Well, and the Mercedes.
I know, Mercedes. But yeah, there tends to be, in sort of all of these car circles, like, do this. Somewhere in California, find a rainy day and say, hey, everyone, let's get our car club or our group of car guys together and see what happens. Because anywhere in the Bay Area, all of us are going to show up in our electric dinghies. It's kind of the way it is. So I think there's probably a large number of enthusiasts who own e-Golfs, surprisingly. But if you really think about it, why wouldn't there be? It's a hot hatch that's just inexpensive or free to operate, basically. So 034 thinks there's a chance that they can make their money back on the investment on springs, and I'm all for it. Now I just got to decide whether I want to ruin my car's ride quality by slamming it to the ground.
There's something very luxurious about having my car on 16s with the ride height that it has and just sort of driving over everything. Mm-hmm. There's no tiptoeing.
A speed bump.
Oh,
don't care.
I thought you were going to go with a different direction. You chose a non-animated.
Oh, look, a pedestrian. Oh.
So you shouldn't have crossed against the signal. It's painful.
I wasn't going to tell everyone that you purposefully hit pedestrians who aren't in crosswalks. I mean, one day this could be used against you in a court of law.
I have never done that.
I was walking innocently across the street, and I heard this screaming engine. And that's when I can be the expert witness to be like, you heard a screaming engine from an electric Golf. Mm-hmm.
This will be your what's her name?
Marissa Tomei.
Yes, from...
the 64 Tempest didn't come with a limited slip differential.
Pause Attraction. She calls it Pause Attraction because that was their brand name for it.
That is, of course, the movie My Cousin Vinny. Was right? That was My Cousin Vinny?
I think so.
Yeah, whatever. So anyway...
Everyone always just brings that scene up when they hear me mouthing off about automotive.
Because you look like Marissa Tomei?
Yes. We're basically doppelgangers.
Yeah, and I look like Fred Gwynn. Although my house does look like the Munsters house. It's covered in spider webs, but that's just a function of living in Northern California. And, I didn't have my house sprayed with Fire Exterminator this year, and so there's two results to that. Number one, there are spiders everywhere, but number two, I have all these cute little lizards. They're so cute.
Oh, because they're having snacks?
Yeah, they have something to eat for the first time in a couple of years. And so I walk down my little walkway, and they're like, pew! And they're so cute. I can't, now I have to deal with the spiders and the tarantulas and all the fucking wolf spiders and shit that are attacking me so that I can have pet lizards in my yard.
We should move to the city.
I know.
We don't have any of that shit here. Although we do have coyotes.
Yeah. I mean, this year has been... Anyway. I also have an update on the Lotus. Because I think Lotus did the... Well, okay. I can't get a part for any of my Volkswagens because VW doesn't support their old cars and they suck at that. And I can't get any parts for Lotus because Lotus sold 6 of these cars, mostly in the UK, and they've since turned into goo and melted and gone back into the earth. And Lotus comes out with a digital dash upgrade for the Elise, which is mind-blowing.
When did the Series 2 Elise go out of production?
2012.
And they're still in there. They're like, oh, we've made it better 8 years later.
So I think, look.
Or a bit late. Took a long time.
A bit tardy. But I think what happened was that AIM, which is an Italian company that makes race car dashes, made a dash for the Elise, and Lotus probably very wisely saw that there was an opportunity to make it a real Lotus part, make it available through Lotus dealers, and made a hood, which I think actually AIM started, but Lotus finished. They got the finish right on it, so it looks perfectly factory. And so it comes in a genuine Lotus parts box, and you pull your dashboard out, and you place this one back in it. The odometer comes preset. The cluster. And it is fully plug and play. It is bizarre. You literally take your little cluster out, you pull the pigtail wiring harness off the back, plug yours in, start it, and go. I think I'm not the biggest fan of digital dashes in the world, but I will say that the original Elise dash is kind of ghetto. I mean, it's just not a piece.
It's a bit low rent. It's light. Yeah. It's very lightweight.
It is unbelievably light, actually. Shockingly so. When I pulled that out of my car, I'm like, "Where's the beef?" But there are a
Clara
bunch.
Pell.
You remember that commercial?
No, it existed before I was born.
Yes,
but I've studied it. I studied it in school.
Oh God. That makes my dad really old because he was an executive TV producer and he did that commercial. Anyway, did that string of commercials. There are two big issues there are many big issues with the Lotus that this dash solves.
Or small issues.
Because they're Lotus, they're not rather small. But first of all, the way the car is constructed, it's two clamshells that take up the whole thing. It has no bumpers. It has no fenders. You touch anything in the car, it's got a $25,000 repair bill because you're replacing the clam. The digital dash allows a backup camera. This is the coolest thing in the world. The camera is tiny. I'm sure now that I mentioned, I'm going to have to insert inserts of all of these bullshit. But the camera's tiny. I put it right above the license plate, and it's amazing. I can see what's behind me when I'm parking. That is super cool. The other issue, there are three. So the secondary issue, which is a huge problem for me and you and no one else, is that the coolant temperature display read out in Fahrenheit, I believe it's pronounced. I don't know what this means. What is 206? What is 194? What's 172? Fahrenheit is the dumbest fucking measurement in the history of the world. And now I can choose to have my coolant temperature displayed in centigrade, as Jesus and Lotus both requested. You have no I was expecting some pithy comment from you about this.
No, I mean, I am used to Celsius from all the Mercedes-Benzes, and the nice thing about them is that they are actually hooked up to something, and so the temperature changes and the gauge moves, as opposed to the needle just going right to the middle and hanging out there unless your head gasket has blown, which is something that annoys me about new cars. Like, I like to know the number of degrees because I can see when the thermostat comes on and then the temperature changes in the old Mercedes. That's really a luxurious experience that helps you understand.
Drops slightly.
Yeah.
But you know what that is. My thermostat opens, for example, at 84 degrees because you see it. But 85, it's usually 85 or 87 or what. This whole Fahrenheit thing, I don't understand. So that is a big benefit. And then the third and the biggest benefit is the speedometers in the Elises are so ridiculously inaccurate that I never knew how fast I was going in that car. I think I calculated mine as reading 17% too fast.
That's optimistic. That's like suitable for an Italian car.
Yeah. And so I brought it, the one time I brought it into a dealer, it was a recall that I had to deal with on that car. And I'm like, guys, there's got to be a way for you to adjust this. And the service foreman said every single Elise owner that brought his car in said the same thing. Please fix the speedometer. There's nothing they can do. The AIM Dash has two ways of displaying speed. One, it can use GPS, or two, it can use the engine computer, but it has a correction factor that you can dial in. So I've entered in a correction factor, and when my speedometer says 75, I'm doing 74.5, which is exactly what I want. Amazing. So
welcome to the future.
Yeah, it really does feel like the future. A plug-and-play digital dash for a car that's out of production for a decade. I think that is genuinely cool.
I can guarantee you there's a very small number of manufacturers that would ever do anything like that. And anyone who would be very, very enthusiast-oriented.
I bet, so Volkswagen did a digital dash in the mid to late 80s called a DigiFits. And it's
Is this like it looks like the Audi one?
Yeah.
The Audi Quattro one?
Yep, exactly. It doesn't look exactly like it, but it's a similar sort of vintage. And I bet it's all Mark 1 and Mark 2 cars. So it's Scirocco 16 valve and then like all the Mark 2 cars. I bet they could sell dozens, if not, maybe 50 of those. But if Volkswagen started producing them again, I bet there is a market. There would be a market. Just cool things.
Especially in the Radwood era. My God, everyone would freak out about it. Even if it were an aftermarket thing that wasn't vetted, I'm sure people would flock to it.
Yeah, that's true. Again, not a huge fan of digital dashes, but the fact that you can, have things displayed that you would otherwise not been able to have displayed, or a backup camera on a car like an Elise is a really, really cool thing. Mm-hmm. So maybe one day there'll be a retrofit kit for your dad's Alfa Giulia to put like the touchscreen in there instead of the spinny iDriving wheel.
Yeah, goodness, he's still in the quick reference guide. It might
he
be
wouldn't
nice.
have to if it had a touchscreen. Kidding.
Yeah, I guess he can use an iPhone. It's true.
Yeah. So those are my personal car updates.
I don't have anything that I care to share.
Bullshit. So you now own, in addition to your e-Golf, you have 2 Mercedes 124 V8s. And I think we talked about this earlier on the show. But you were bitching about something yesterday.
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, yeah. So oftentimes people will be... So now that I have a 400e and a 500e, and the 500e is like legendary, and they've gotten very expensive, and they're sort of collectible now, which is why I never drive mine, which is why I bought a 400e, so I could actually drive it, but it's broken, so I haven't been driving it. In any case...
that needs to be a little like jiffy that you can get in the bottom of your thing of you being like, I bought this, but it's collectible, so I can't drive it, so I bought a replacement that's not collectible, so I could drive it, but it broke, so I can't.
All of that's true. Several humans, maybe 3 of them, have asked me, like, how do the 400 and 500 compare? Because 400s are basically free and 500s are basically, like, very expensive. And they are
both V8. So for people who don't know.
Yes, the 400e is a 4.2 liter version of the 500e, which is 5 liters. And they're the same motor. They're both the M119 quad cam 4 valve per cylinder engine, and they both have the same transmission. The cars look and feel pretty similar to each other, with one really significant difference. I would say the biggest difference is they have different rear end ratios. The 500e has a short rear end ratio to make the thing just like a monster off the line, and basically in all situations. It's a 282, I think, rear end. And the 400 is like a 220 or 2 low 2s. Huge difference in gearing. And basically the equivalent is that you're basically 1 gear lower all the time in the 500e is what it feels like, except for there's no more additional gears to go. And the cars have really dramatically different characters as a result of that. And really dramatically different fuel economy also.
So, in its defense, the 500e also has much wider wheels and tires, right?
And it's flared fenders,
right?
Correct. So yes, there's a pretty sizable difference in character. If you hadn't driven a 500e, you wouldn't really notice it. The 400e is very nice, and if I hadn't driven the 500e for 6 months, then they would feel, I think, much more similar. But I think there's probably like a second difference, 0 to 60, between these 2 cars, which are separated by 40 horsepower. And a lot of that is the result of gearing, final drive ratio. And so,
it's the same exact transmission, so same 4-speed in each.
Correct. Although the valve body is different because the 500 by default starts in second gear, and if you boot it, then it'll shift down to first, while it's moving off the line. Or you can manually request it to start in first gear. And the 400 starts in first gear by default because it's got so much taller rear end ratio and it's got less power. But yeah, the transmission otherwise is the same transmission. But very different character to the cars, and there's like not nearly as much hooliganism to the 500 of a result of this difference.
Because 400.
Yeah, sorry, the 400 is much less of a hooligan than the 500 is. The 500 makes me feel like, I mean, David E. Davis used the analogy. He said like a leopard on a tethered goat. I think describing a race that he got into with a Mustang 5.0. Leopard on a tethered goat.
Oh God, he was such a pompous twat. But I did do a huge one-wheel accidental burnout in your 400e. I mean, it is not slow.
No, it's not slow, and it's got a lot of torque, and it also does not have ASR.
Or tires.
Yes.
You're the Kelly
the
Chargers
tires are
from
pre-owned.
1877 on that thing. But yeah, the 500e is a monster. I mean, that car is still surprisingly fast. That engine, I mean, variable valve timing back at that point, that was pretty amazing.
1990. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sort of had power everywhere, pulled really hard. But I was very surprised when I drove the 400 at just how much more relaxed of a car it is.
Yes, entirely because of gearing. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I know you often complain. Oh, by the way, didn't you have a Boxster Spyder? Speaking of gearing,
Spyder, yeah. 80 miles an hour in second gear, for fuck's sake.
Yeah, so I know you. This is the thing you always complain about modern cars, is especially Porsches, is the gearing.
Porsches, Ford Shelby GT350s. I mean, here's the thing: automakers are up against these bizarro laws that have unintended consequences, and so I've talked to a bunch of engineers through the years about some of the gearing changes, some of the gearing decisions they've made. And actually, I have a feeling that the Porsche 718, the 4-liter, which 718 is now a genuine 4-liter natural aspirated 6. I have a feeling that the gear ratios that they're putting in these cars are not actually for fuel economy, because this car is cylinder deactivation and all the rest of the stuff. Because the 718 actually has a very short sixth gear. You're at 3,000 RPM at 75 miles an hour. So it's screaming on the highway, but then it does 53 in first and 80 in second. So they stacked.
Is there a difference between when you change the gears?
There were times when I changed gear and I went back to check to make sure I had just changed gear. No, I love closely stacked ratios. I love that. But
I want them closely stacked, but I want the last gear to be tall.
Yep, I want a big long cruising gear. So the GT cars at Porsche don't have a long seventh the way the non-GT cars do. So, like a 911 has got closely stacked first through sixth and then a big long drop to seventh. I like that. I think that's a really great solution.
Because there's something really luxurious about cruising down the highway at some number of miles an hour that's legal, but in some place that would be the equivalent of 85 miles an hour, and looking down and seeing like 2,400 RPM.
Well, right, and the real benefit is that you can drive by at least one of those gas stations without having to refuel every time.
Or the sound station.
Yeah, that's true at Laguna. But yeah, but I think the real reason they're doing this is drive-by noise regs, which is bizarre. So one of the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, FMVSS.
This is a U.S. regulation?
U.S., yeah. One of the U.S. regulations is it puts you in third gear for a manual car. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of 100-mile-an-hour third gears, because you have a car with a loud engine, a loud exhaust, and a lot of power with loud tires. And you wouldn't think tires are a problem, but actually, this one blew my mind.
It's like when you hear an electric car go by at speed, you're like, oh, this sounds like traffic.
Tesla fails. They had to do a lot of work with Michelin because the Model S fails drive-by noise regs. So it's a box. It's like, it's a cone, basically. It's not really a cone, but it's a starting mark and a finishing mark. And you have to enter the box doing 30 miles an hour and accelerate with full throttle. And so they're measuring your speed at the beginning and then a bunch of points along the way and at the end. And the Model S picks up so
measuring
much
your sound.
Speed. Measuring sound, yeah. The Model S picks up so much speed that it fails completely based on, or did until they did the tires. They made tires based on tire and wind noise. And many years ago, a friend who works at a car company.
Asinineness of regulations,
wait, it gets even crazier. So years ago, a friend of mine who works at a car company that I can't talk about, but it starts with N and ends with Isan, was talking about a car that's called a G. It starts with a G and ends with TR. And I was bitching about this car, like I got crucified in the real world by a minivan. And I'm in a 600 friggin' horsepower Nissan GTR. I mean, this is Godzilla, for God's sake. And I floor it, and nothing, and nothing, and nothing, and nothing. And then it finally downshifted and went. And by the time this fucking turbo spooled up and the thing took off, the minivan was gone, and I lost my merge. I didn't want to lose my merge in a $100,000 supercar. That wasn't turbo lag or transmission lag. That was programmed in. And so this friend was like, you were at 28 miles an hour, weren't you? Whatever number it was. And I was like, the fuck do I know? All I know is behind a minivan, I swear I stayed. And he's like, well, you were at 28 miles an hour or whatever it was where that test starts. And at that speed, we might have to put in a slight delay on the downshift to make sure that we can pass the drive-by regs. And I'm like, what? And he was like, yeah, same with the pickup truck that I'm not supposed to talk about. That's, I think it starts with a T and ends with Iton. This is years ago, but whatever. The point was they had to do that on the pickup truck too. Like a 2.5 second delay because that 5.6, that glorious beastly 5.6 liter V8 makes so much noise and accelerates so quickly that they have to actually program in a delay. So this is the world that modern automotive engineers live in, where they have to deal with electric cars failing drive-by noise regulations. They have to put in extra transmission downshift lags where it ignores your request for full throttle because of drive-by noise regs. So great, get hit by the train that's coming so your car doesn't piss off someone who's sleeping. And then Porsche putting 100-mile-an-hour third gears in their car.
So they're trying to dull acceleration in this case, in this scenario.
They quiet the motor down. And in the case of that 718, so I haven't done my Insta verdict yet, but I'll be doing it this week. So at some point soon, or I will have just done it. I do think that the 718 Spyder is the best sports car I've driven in possibly ever. It really does everything well, but it also has some compromises baked in because of bizarro modern things like the gearing. And under 3,700 RPM, the exhaust baffles never open up ever. And I think that's...
what makes the Spyder better than the coupe, the GT4?
Because it's the convertible.
Okay, so if someone like me, who is not really a big convertible fan, wanted one of those cars, then you would say the coupe is just as good?
Yeah, the Cayman GT4 and the 718 Boxster are now the same car.
All right. Just wanted to make sure that there wasn't some like big delta between the GT4 and the Spyder.
No, and I'm sure if you measured lap time, the GT4 would be a 4.3.
No, I don't care about that. I just am not really a big convertible guy. Like, I'm dark enough brown as it is.
Yeah, put you in the sun for 30 seconds, you'll definitely get shot at by the cops.
Yeah, and I'm not interested in that, so...
God, that was so offensive. I'm joking.
Are you? I'm not.
Well, you're allowed to say that stuff. I'm not.
Okay, well, I'll say it. Then you don't have to.
I would much prefer the 718 come with a regular Boxster top because the Spyder top is stupid. I mean, when the top is up, you can't access the rear trunk at all. Like sorry, your groceries are not coming out. You got to put the top down, or at least disconnect the flying buttresses first. That's fucking dumb. And
that is dumb. See, this is why you want the coupe.
No, it's why I want a regular Boxster roof. Whatever. But point is, though, so this under 3,700 RPM, the exhaust won't switch open no matter what you do, even if you're in loud exhaust mode. And I think that's because it has cylinder deactivation, which is the stupidest fucking thing in the world on a car that is at 3,500 RPM on the highway that you're buying for the sake of the driving experience. And that's a perfect illustration of the hoops that these engineers have to jump through to get these cars past modern stuff. It's not that they really are that concerned with the real world fuel economy. It's that they're concerned with on some stupid ass drive-by test. And if they start in third gear, maybe they'll hit 3,600 RPM by the end of that stupid sound box. And so the exhaust has to stay closed that whole time, no matter what. And then they throw cylinder deactivation in because some dumbass European test is 80 kilometer an hour steady speed. It has to use less than 0.3 liters per 100 kilometers of fuel and blah, 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 blah. And they build in these compromises. The question is just always how well they do it. In the case of that 718 Spyder, there are a bunch of little niggles, but overall, my God, is that thing good.
Well, at least better to have it with some sort of asterisks than not at all. So
here's the thing: when you have 4 liters worth of torque an 80 mile an hour, in a relatively light car, an 80 mile an hour second gear isn't the end of the world. The gearing was a little bit bothersome around town. I thought, I wish I could play with this and shift a little bit more.
Yeah, that's how I feel about my motorcycles. My motorcycles are geared to go 190, 180 miles an hour. And so it's like second, and the thing, red lines at I think 10,500 RPM. And so if I see third gear in the city, it means I'm being very naughty.
Where does second go on those? Like similar to the Porsche?
Yeah, I'm sure it's at least 100 miles an hour.
In second?
I think so. I don't know. I'll have to look it up.
Yeah.
It's very tall gearing. Right. First is good for 40, 50. Yeah.
Right. You kind of need that on a motorcycle, otherwise you're just going to flip backwards. There's only so much.
That's also true. I mean, because the thing has 200 horsepower and weighs 400 pounds.
Holy, your motorcycle has more horsepower than almost all of my cars?
It's 195 horsepower, but yes. But don't worry, it has like 90 foot-pounds of torque.
Doesn't matter. Hold on, think about this.
Because it's
I have 7 cars, 5 of which have less horsepower than your motorcycle does.
That's correct, yes.
And all of which are quick, by the way. Like, wow.
But so, for comparison, the motorcycle, I mean, those numbers you were talking about last week on the Lucid are basically, my motorcycle's pretty similar to that, slightly slower.
Yeah,
995.
Hugo set.
Well, no, I can't do that. You need a
perfect.
perfect. No, absolutely not. You're quite correct. 995 through the quarter mile at 144, I think, is the quoted figure for my bike, and my bike's 8 years old or 6 years old.
Yeah, motorcycles are a whole different world of crazy. But many years ago, I decided I was going to go get my motorcycle license, and I came to the conclusion that I would die, and so I bought a 911 convertible instead, because I thought at that point, the closest I could get to the experience of a bike. It wasn't necessarily the speed. I just wanted open air, and I wanted to be outside and listen to a glorious engine and be moving at a brisk pace. I thought not
Elise.
Probably.
Well, Elise is not listening to glorious noise.
It's not bad.
It's not good.
Not great. Really? I don't know.
I don't know. There's not a lot of 4 cylinders that I really like listening to.
I did have to put a Larini on the Elise because it was just too quiet, and all you heard was supercharger noise, which sounds like it sounds like a cat in heat.
Somebody's
basically.
suffocating a cat or
Yeah.
playing a cat like a bagpipe.
Yeah. I mean, I will say that of my 4 cylinders, it's the least good sounding. Mercedes sounds amazing induction noise, but that's it. And then the Volkswagens are awesome.
I have not spent much time in that car. I would like to revisit, especially I don't have no recollection of induction noise in that car. I think I was fairly nice to it.
In the 2316?
I was quite nice to that car.
Bullshit! You were hauling ass. Your definition of quite nice and other people's definition of quite nice might be quite different.
Your car's a Euro car, so compression ratio difference, gearing also different. Speaking of gearing,
there's the anti-argument. The Euro 2.316 had longer gears than the US car. I think it was like 307 versus 327. Don't quote me.
The 308 is also like that. Your 308.
Yeah.
The US cars got short ratios because the US cars had less power.
Right.
That's why they do that. It's from the era of when, for emissions reasons, the U.S. cars have appreciably less power, so they just solved it by putting a shorter rear end ratio in it, so that the car would not be just
so they could still get the 0 to 60 number. But the weird thing is that trick usually works because I'm a whore for short gearing. The Euro 308, the one that I drove, was not as alive as the U.S. car that I drove. The U.S.
because the gearing dulled it.
Because the gearing dulled it down. But the 2316, I actually much prefer the Euro gearing, and I think it's because Mercedes shifter is its own thing, right? It's a very different shifter than everything else, and it will not be rushed. This is not the type of car that shift as fast as you can, and you had to shift too much, and it's also the US spec 2.316 ran out of power at 5,000 and a bit, and it would wheeze its way to 6,500 where the limiter was. The Euro car pulls like a raped ape right into the 7,100 RPM limiter. So there's a big personality difference up top. But so you combine the US, I mean, I was exaggerating. The US car isn't that bad, but the US car doesn't love to hit redline. And you combine that with gears so short that I think you're in third at 60 in the US spec car, somewhere right around there. You're shifting a lot, and it just isn't a pleasurable experience. The gearing doesn't match the engine's personality, which doesn't match the way the shifter works, which doesn't match the car. So I think the Euro 2316 is the only time I actually have ever preferred the longer gear set. Didn't your dad put a short rear end ratio in the E39 M5?
Yes, that's right. It reduces the top speed of the car from 209 to 191.
Your dad is my fucking hero.
Yeah,
like, who buys an E39 M5 and is like, I want shorter gears?
Yeah.
Like, that car costs as much as a house.
Well, he wanted shorter gear.
He's
So
a
actually,
fucking hero.
yeah, it's very brisk. In fact, under full throttle yesterday, it squatted so much I heard some tire rubbing noise.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because the short ratio and the power, and it's a little bit lowered. It's not like stupidly low, but it's a little bit lowered.
He's selling this now, huh?
You don't want this thing.
Can I drive it?
Yes, you can drive it. I don't know. It just feels so like big. I don't know why it feels so big to me. It feels bigger than the 530. Like, I've spent a lot of time hauling in a 530, and for whatever reason, the M5 feels bigger. I don't know what it is. That's
got to be our next episode, because this keeps coming up with us. There are so many times where we prefer the small motor.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
If I were hauling in a canyon, I do prefer actually the 530. Wow, the 530 needs more power, but all in all, like, if I had to go point to point in a canyon road, I would choose the 530 over the M5.
I strangely at one point owned two E39s. I had a first year 528i, so a 97 528i sedan and a 2003 525i wagon. Both automatics, neither sport packs. And I had to get rid of, I got the 03 to replace the 97 and I couldn't sell it. I lived in Pittsburgh. It was impossible to sell a car like that there. And so I brought both of them to the dealership because they had a 30,000 mile Dynan M5 in there. And I thought, I'll just trade both of these cars in, get my dream car, and it'll, and refinance my house to pay for it. And I really thought that I would prefer the M5, but I left in my wagon, and I had a friend go and get my sedan for me. I actually preferred the 6-cylinder E39s to the M5, which is kind of fucked up. But I think that's a whole episode, because there are a bunch of cars where I say, get the small motor. It's got more personality.
And you just get to engage with it more. If it has too much power, you kind of just mat it and go, and there's no sort of joy.
Well, all it takes is drive a 500 Mercedes versus a 560 back in the 80s, with the two valve V8s. The 560 was a 5.5 liter for the US, and it was all torque, no revs. I think it revved to 5,500 or something. And the 5 liter actually made more power. In some
Are you talking about US or Euro 500s? Because this is from the era when there was a big difference between US and Euro cars.
Yeah.
Like, the 560 in Europe was 300 horsepower, and in the US it was 238.
Right.
Like 42 horsepower difference.
It's a big difference. But the bigger difference was the personality. So you get into a Euro spec 126 500 SEC, for example, and it's gutless below 4,000 RPM. It's just kind of, it's the rise from idle to 4,000 RPM exists to get you to 4,000 RPM so that it could then go batshit from there, from 4,000 to redline. And the US cars would just...
In an S-Class.
In an S-Class.
I love it.
And then the US cars would just incinerate the tires off the line. I mean, just big brute force, low-end torque, and then couldn't make it to 5,000. And I, obviously I would say for your mother, but your mother would have been driving something fucking amazing because your parents are apparently like automotive gods. For the typical old woman driving a Mercedes, well, she probably would prefer the burnout-y torque to the, I need to rev the shit out of this.
It's a different type of elderly lady altogether also.
Yeah, that's true. I mean,
sorry, I don't want the Euro car, and the burnouts are not nearly as good. I'm not spending enough on tires.
Like the old lady who bought my 2.316 new. Like,
yes,
she spent
I love this
more
story.
on I had to ask her. I had to ask her when I bought it. I'm like, why? She spent more on a 2.316 with crank windows and no air conditioning.
Yeah,
And she would have
190E.
on a 190 on a subcompact, nothing little sedan, than she would have on an air conditioning equipped V8 S-Class. I'm like, what were you thinking? And she said she had to have it weil so süß aussah, because it looked so cute. I was like, you're a hero.
She bought a Cosworth because she thought it was
Weil
cute.
so süß aussah. I was
And
shocked.
why didn't she buy like an eight valve?
It must have been the spoiler in the body kit. Like she bought a dogleg manual Cosworth engine, 7,000 RPM, 4-cylinder, screaming lunatic with self-leveling rear suspension and crank
Homologation
windows.
car.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Because it was cute.
That's a hero.
Yeah. So she would have obviously preferred the high revving 5-liter non-burnouty
Yes.
but Autobahn stormy S-Class.
Yeah. She needed a 500 SEC.
Right. As opposed to a 560 lumbering American torque burnout machine. I mean, they do great burnouts.
Other case studies for gearing.
Miata. Miata wins
Yeah.
Miata's the case study for me and every single automotive engineer who's like, we can't do this because XYZ. I'm like, shut up, Miata. We can't make it lighter, shut up, Miata. We can't make it smaller, shut up, Miata. We can't have good visibility, shut up, Miata. We can't put gears in that, George, shut up, Miata.
Yeah, even the 6-speed cars, 5-speed and 6-speed cars, really short gearing. I drove my 5-speed NA to the racetrack, which requires a lot of going fast, and I was like, oh, this is miserable. I'm going like 4,400 RPM on the highway in 5th gear. I could really use another gear. But this is the 6-speed ones are just almost as bad, I think.
It's not almost as bad. It's almost as good. Because you never had to do the entire time on the highway, no matter how many Priuses you were passing.
Turn down the radio?
Downshift. You were in the power band. At 80 miles an hour, you're in the power. Look, that car
yes.
is
That's how the 500e works also. The reason why the behavior, the performance of the 500e Mercedes is so great is because you're in the thick of the power band at 80 miles an hour. And so I have not verified this, and it's probably not true, but in terms of perception, it certainly feels like the car accelerates more quickly in 4th gear from 80 to 100 than it does from 60 to 80. Which is
probably not, but it probably feels that way.
It feels that way. The car is very accelerative from 80 to 100 miles an hour.
Yeah. Not that you would ever do that on a public road, ever.
No.
In a Corolla.
Nope, never. I've never done that today.
Look, the whole gearing thing exists very simply, right? So my VWs, all of my 80s cars are geared very, very short. So they're all 4,000 RPM on the highway. And that's because they all maxed out somewhere between 105 and 140 miles an hour. So let's take, for example, the Scirocco, right, which was top speed, was the fastest Volkswagen ever made. US car did 120 miles an hour. That to make a car...
That's faster than a Vanagon? I'm just kidding.
I'm gonna cut you. You're not allowed to make fun of Scirocco. So to maximize a car's top speed, what you need to do is gear it so that it hits its
power peak
at the same time, at the highest most speed, right? So I could say, for example, in a car like the Mark II Scirocco with a coefficient of drag of 0.36 in this frontal area, blah, 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 in theory, 105 horsepower at the wheels, which is what those things made, 123 at the motor, would get me to 122 miles an hour. So how do I gear it so that I am at 122 miles an hour at 5,600 RPM? And that's how they chose the gearing. Right. Mm-hmm. And so if you think about it, 6,000 RPM or 5,500 RPM at 120 is going to be 4,000 at 75 or somewhere. I'm not doing the math in my head. But that car is 4,000 from the factory was 4,000 at 75. The Mercedes in the US spec car was 4,000 at 72. Even the Ferrari 308 GT4, 4,000 is 80 miles an hour.
Very short gearing.
Right. Because it revved to 7,700 and that car's power peak was at 75. So that's where it needs to be. And modern cars are geared for fuel economy. They're not geared appropriately. Porsche does. Porsche gears, to bring that argument back to that long 7th, their 7-speed cars are geared for top speed in 6th, and then 7 is a cruising gear on top of that.
I was reading so I used to own a 968, and I was reading the articles from when that car came out initially, because it was their first 6-speed baby car, their first 4-cylinder 6-speed car. And one of the things that repeatedly came up in the articles was that the car reached its top speed in 6th gear, which they purposely include to say that 6th is that they're in doing gear. That. It's a real gear. It's not a cruising overdrive gear or an economy gear.
Like something like a Corvette. I mean, you drive a modern, well, C7 because C8's automatic only. You drive a modern Corvette, it's seventh gear. The thing could barely make it down a hill on the highway. You'd have to downshift if like the sun came out. They were, that was 100% a fuel economy ploy, and they would hit top speed in fourth or fifth. So you have these big long. Well, here's the thing about the Corvette.
That far off. I mean, I'm surprised that it's not sixth, but I do find it very luxurious to cruise around on the highway at 2,500 RPM or something.
Then
like
you
that.
loved that rental Corolla, didn't you? Because that CVT delivered that wide gear spread at 2,700 RPM at 80 miles an hour. We got 38 point something miles to the gallon. Practically a Prius, even with you driving.
I'll just have an e-Golf, thanks.
Yeah, you get 125 miles per gallon equivalent and do burnouts everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because again, the rental Corolla couldn't do a burnout.
Verified not by me, for once.
I admit that shit. No problem. Did it right at a red light, but nothing compared to you driving at 100 miles an hour through Mexico.
Yeah. All of that is
patently, theoretically, something. Insert.
That
All right.
could have maybe possibly occurred at some point somewhere.
I'm gonna go back to singing. What were we in that Instagram post? Oh, Natalie Cole videos. That was pretty good. I got.
No, it wasn't. It was awful.
No, the single. It was pretty good that I got you to sing on camera.
Oh yes, but the singing was just atrocious.
Who cares? We're here to entertain people. We're not, we're not
here to win Grammys.
Singers are supposed to entertain people too. We were having fun, and I did have to get like 45 minutes of actual video to get 10 seconds of you singing. But it was a good song. We should probably put it at the end of this.
No, come on.
No, people are listening on podcasts. They would like, we can't. We'll just have. We're gonna have to send.
They'll file
them
a lawsuit.
He shattered
wrongful
the glass
death.
in my
Wrongful death lawsuits.
It'll be this convoluted wrongful death thing. Like I drove my E46. I heard what they were doing. I wanted to kill myself, and I drove myself into a brick building, and then the Takata airbag fired, and the igniter got me, and yeah. Somebody else. We just lost another human being to a Takata airbag igniter today.
Oh, now there's 6 people who watch the podcast instead, because one of them just died. Great. So we're not going to be no singing. Great. Happy trails. We'll try not to buy any cars in the next week. I'll try.
Speak for yourself. Yeah.